Is performance and safety like water and oil? Not if you're Porsche. That's this week on Motoring 99.
TSN's Motoring 99 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them. And Midas Car Care, the way it should be.
Hello everybody and welcome to Motoring 99. You know, without a doubt, sport utilities have become the cash cow in the auto manufacturing industry. I mean, they just can't keep up with the demand. What's the attraction? Well, for many, it's simply status, but for many more, it's the benefits of the four-wheel drive systems in inclement weather. Now, you already know that, but what you may not know is that all-wheel technology was developed a long time ago and by a company that manufactures one of the world's most famous sports cars.
Dr. Ferdinand Porsche actually started working on all-wheel drive systems for the army because it was thought the more drive you had on the wheels, the better traction you would have on the field. And they were actually called road trains, where you would have an electric engine on each wheel for as much as 8 wheels to transport some equipment and men.
The first true 911-based car that incorporated all-wheel drive was the 959, which came out in 1983, and that was utilized. It was a Group B rally car for international rally competition. It won the Paris-Dakar Rally and the Ferrol Rally. Very unusual because it was a sports car that in essence was the very first sports car to win a grueling off-road rally.
Although Porsche and Volkswagen have plans to build a sport utility in the year 2002, the Carrera 4 has proven since its debut in 1989 that with a good set of winter tires, it will more than hold its own in winter conditions. With the exception of the all-wheel drive system, the Carrera 4 is basically the same vehicle as the 911. It's powered by the same water-cooled 3.4 flat 6 with 296 horses. The Carrera 4, however, is the first Porsche to come equipped with an electronic control system known as PSM, for Porsche Stability Management.
And what it does, in essence, it aids the driver in alleviating understeer or oversteer. So if you get into a situation where you come into a corner a bit too fast and the front end starts sliding, okay, and you ask for more steering, which is the natural reaction that people will have, and lift off the power, the system will actually brake the inside rear wheel to create a pivot point to bring the front back online where the steering wheel is pointing. Now, if you get into a situation where you get oversteer, meaning where the rear end is sliding, okay, the system will detect that and momentarily brake the outside front wheel, okay, to create again a pivot point from which the rear end will be brought back into the back of the car. So it stabilizes the car until the car is back on the trajectory that is selected by the steering wheel. So what the system is doing now is trying to keep the car in line with where the steering wheel is pointing and managing not only with the brakes but with the engine management. So it's actually backing off timing and backing off throttle. You could see right there the front wheel stop. That was the front wheel bringing the back end in. Now we will switch the system off, find the comfortable speed again. As you can see, the circle is getting quite a bit bigger. As you accelerate into a corner, you generate understeer. So we now have oversteer, which implies that someone is being too rough with the steering wheel, and even the great Hurley Haywood can spin a car when the system is not on. Okay, this pass will have the PSM system on, and as you go through the slalom at a constant rate of speed, you could definitely feel the system working on the front and the rear axle, where it keeps the front pointing in and the rear axle from stepping out. Okay, this time we're going to do it with system off. Again, at a constant rate of speed to compare equitably, and we're going to try to create a pendulum effect to get the rear end to step out, which it's doing right now. It's much more difficult to control the car like this, and gives you the value of the system on.
So if the system is this good, why do only 20% of 911 buyers opt for the Carrera 4?
It's a question that I'm asking myself. I think that if you are going to spend $102,000 on a car, why not put an extra $8,000 and get this incredible system and have this backup that is available to you if you do make a mistake or if you are confronted to in an emergency situation, so that you're sure that you'll be able to react correctly to it.
You spent how much on that Porsche? And you're going to have one more glass of wine? You better think twice, and I'll tell you why later on Kenzie's Corner.
Up next, 220 horsepower and Laguna Seca Raceway. Mates for one fast test drive.
Nissan chose Laguna Seca to launch the 2000 edition of the popular Maxima, a car that's seen significant improvement with each of the previous generations. One thing that's evolved for the better is the 3-litre V6 that provides the power. The 24-valve twin-cam mill now pumps out 222 horsepower, an increase of 32, and 217 pounds-feet of torque. The upgrades are down to a couple of important factors. A revised variable intake manifold improves the engine's ability to breathe, and a new exhaust system that features equal-length runners and a special muffler. A door in the muffler opens to lower the back pressure under wide-open throttle applications. When this happens, the exhaust note changes, becoming noticeably louder. On the one hand, this is a good thing as the motor sounds the real part. On the downside, it drones at about 2800 RPM, which is where you do most of your driving. From a driving perspective, the motor's a true delight, providing instantaneous response to input. It also delivers the power in a linear fashion and over a wide operating range.
The one item Nissan didn't address was the lack of headroom when you go with the sunroof. I've got virtually no room in this car whatsoever. Now the problem is that if you want the mid-range or top-of-the-line SE, you're going to have to take the sunroof because it's a standard item. So if you happen to be tall of torso, tough luck. You've got to live with the base model.
The automatic box delivers silky smooth shifts, a prompt kickdown and well-spaced ratios. Suffice it to say it complements the engine very nicely. As with the engine, the handling characteristics have been improved with each generation.
We're now going to do a lane change maneuver. Why? Because it happens in real life, and what we want to find out is how quickly you can recover when you're in transition from stable to unstable. Sharp left, sharp right. How quickly can you catch it? This maneuver tells you. Very quick, very stable, and very easy to catch.
Thrashing around Laguna Seca proved Maxima to be highly competent with very little body roll and minimal understeer, the latter only showing up as you encroached on the edge of the envelope.
One of the biggest changes they've made to the suspension is relocating the lateral link. This allows the rear suspension to tow the wheels in and actually induce a little more understeer than the old suspension in the previous car used to. Quite frankly, it works very nicely too. Rear seat legroom was an issue on the previous car. It no longer is on the new Maxima. They've stretched the wheelbase by 2 inches and given it all to the rear seat passengers. The front seat set for me, there's an acre of legroom.
Inside, Maxima comes with all the stuff one expects. The power items are neatly grouped together on the door panel, and the radio and climate controls reside in the right order in the center stack. That said, it's still all very conservative in spite of the new look dash design. Nissan's calling it the Wave, in essence making it more slab-like.
The additional horsepower and revised rear suspension transform a good car into a great car. And yes, the Maxima still solves that age-old dilemma. You must have a family sedan for family commitments, but you love to drive. Now, while you won't be able to use one of these all the time, it's nice to know that you can.
Go to any car show these days and it becomes obvious the aging, affluent baby boomers have become a big influence on the auto industry. There's been a wave of retro cars reminding boomers of their youth.
Now, here are three more super performers from Ford. 1957 Ford Thunderbirds. You're looking at the latest version of the most talked about car ever introduced to the American public.
So it was no surprise when Ford reincarnated the 57 Thunderbird.
New T-Bird's beautiful. They don't like to call them retro. You call them retro. I call them retro. The designers like to say heritage.
This is an American icon that the consumer said, please bring back. We don't call it retro. Retro to us is taking old materials and using them. This takes what we call heritage.
Because they don't like to create that illusion that somebody has done this before. You know, they don't like to marry divorced women, things like that. So heritage is their word. But right, retro, it's here. And how far it's going to go, we don't know. But the T-Bird is certainly a beautiful job of modern retro. We've got the new Chrysler PT Cruiser, the Beetles, and there's probably more coming. I've seen some overseas. But I thought it was beautiful, and I thought the interior was great too.
Who'll be buying this, and do they have to remember the 57?
Well, our volume is going to be relatively small. We intentionally want to make this a high-image car with a lot of exclusivity, and it'll be a car for the early part of the millennium.
When it goes down the street, you'll turn your head, and that's really what's important. There's a zillion cars out there. The Thunderbird breaks through the clutter.
So it's not going to be a car for everybody, but there'll be a lot of people who remember the two-seaters, and also I think anybody who is looking for a real I am what I drive statement. So it's going to be a real image car.
It really isn't a replica of the old Bird, but when you see it, you know what it is. You know, it goes by and say, oh, that's the Thunderbird.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns the gas cap and filler neck on your vehicle. It's important that you get a good seal between the gas cap and the fuel filler neck on your vehicle for a couple of reasons. First of all, to prevent hydrocarbons or raw gas vapor from escaping from the tank, to prevent infiltration of water into the tank that can contaminate your fuel, and you don't want to have rust forming around this neck because then you'll never get a proper seal. Ideally, we want our filler neck to look squeaky clean the way it does right down there, all the way up the threads and over to this perimeter here. You can see how this one is kind of brown down in the threads and rusty looking, and it's a little bit bumpy up here where it has to affect the seal with our O-ring. That's the O-ring that it seals with, and you can see how the threads are kind of reddish brown. If we spray them with a bit of rust check, it'll take care of that. And that'll keep that area from corroding. Now this is an important thing to prevent this corrosion, because in the next few years it's going to come under scrutiny during emission tests. If it's corroded and bumpy around there, you won't get a proper seal and you're going to have hydrocarbons emissions. That's your Midas tip of the week.
This is obviously a car for the serious driving enthusiast. It produces 240 horsepower, the highest normally aspirated product in the marketplace today.
The Honda Motor Company is not the first automaker to unveil a hybrid vehicle, but this VV model will be the first vehicle of its kind to go into dealerships in the United States.
Well, it's time to stop testing cars and actually get real-world experience. We don't consider it will be a high-volume car, but we do think that there's enough people out there who are concerned about the environment, both from fuel economy and from an emission standpoint, that will definitely step up and buy the car. It's a car that combines two sources of propulsion. an internal gasoline engine, 1 liter, 3-cylinder gasoline engine, along with a Honda designed and manufactured electric motor. Primary source of propulsion is the gasoline engine, but whenever extra power is needed, it also then uses the electric motor and battery pack to give it extra performance. So basically you have the fuel economy of a smaller engined car, but the performance of a larger engine car. This car will do 70 miles per gallon combined city and highway miles, giving you a range of over 700 miles on a tank full of fuel. And actually in steady highway driving, it'll probably do well in excess of 80 miles per gallon. The other exciting car on the Honda stand here today is the S2000 Roadster. It's a car that has a 2-liter engine, a twin-cam engine, produces 240 horsepower or 120 horsepower per liter, the highest normally aspirated product in the marketplace today. An all-new platform. It's the first front-engine, rear-drive Honda car since the early 60s sports cars that Honda made back at that time. This is obviously a pure sports car. It's a car for the serious driving enthusiast. It'll be priced somewhere in the neighborhood of about $30,000. Primary competitors will probably be the Porsche Boxster and the BMW Z3. It'll be in U.S. showrooms in September, October, and I believe Canada about the same time.
We're back at Road Atlanta, where test driving is continuing on the new Carrera 4 with this new PSN system. Now, they say this new system will not make you an overconfident driver, but earlier on the slalom course, I looked like I could do no wrong with the system on. Then turn the system off, and it was quickly back to reality. Believe me, this system is impressive, and it will do everything it can to keep you from getting into any trouble. But the bottom line, it cannot fight the human element or overrule the laws of physics. All right, now let's head to the garage and join a man I know would love to have one of these in his driveway, and that's Bill Gardner. Bill?
Brad, give your head a shake. You know how stingy I am. $110,000 for a car? I just figured out I could buy a brand new pickup truck, a brand new Camaro, the motorcycle I want, and still have around $45,000 or $50,000 change left. You think I'd buy one of those things? Not a chance. Anyhow, what I want to talk about this week is exhaust manifolds, a part that can fail from time to time on today's cars and light trucks. When it does, obviously you get a very loud noise. It sounds like your muffler fell off, and it usually comes about quite abruptly, usually as a result of a crack in the manifold, and it may not have been there one day, and then the next day when the crack appears, all of a sudden it's really noisy. Let's have a look at where it's located, and then have a look at one that's got a pretty good substantial crack in it, and we had to change. We're not always this lucky to have a vehicle with a manifold that's so easy to see and easy to work on as it is on this 91 Civic. But when I pull off the exhaust shield off the manifold, there were 4 screws to come out. Now we can see the manifold underneath pretty easily, and there's the 4 runners coming off our 4 exhaust ports on our 4-cylinder engine, and the manifold you can see acts as a collector. It funnels the exhaust from those 4 down into one single common area where the front pipe hooks up, and we need then only a single pipe to go down to our converter. This particular manifold's off a different car, a 93 Corolla, and you can see the crack, the reason why we had to replace this manifold. And when you look at the manifold, you can see the 4 exhaust ports where it collects the exhaust from the cylinder head of the engine and then funnels it all into one to the exit port here on the flange. Then a single pipe goes down to our catalytic converter and our muffler. Now when I flip the manifold over, we've already taken the bolts out for the heat shield, and I'll take the heat shield off. You can see the other side of that same crack, and you can see the carbon and soot that's on the heat shield exactly where that crack was, and that's where our exhaust leak was, and that's why we were hearing all the loud noise. This crack here probably just happened as a result of the heating and cooling. Remember that this manifold can go from real cold to real hot in an awful hurry when you cold start that engine in the wintertime, and it has to expand and contract proportional to the engine heat. So cracks sometimes are a fact of life. Sometimes you can weld them, but in most cases you have to replace the manifold. One thing I can advise you is that if you're having the manifold replaced, if at all possible, have the technician use a torque wrench to tighten the fasteners onto the engine if there is room to get one in there, because these things don't have to be overly tight. They have to move a little bit on the cylinder head of the engine as it heats and cools. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 99.
While you're out cruising cyberspace, why not pull into motoringtv.com? Motoringtv.com is best viewed with autopilot by Romulan and can be downloaded right from our site.
New York City, the Big Apple, the Grand Pomme. We're here on Times Square, and you know, a few years ago, you wouldn't want to have been here in broad daylight, let alone at nighttime. This place was a hellhole. But they elected a mayor named Ralph Giuliani. He's a pretty tough guy, and he decided, we're not going to put up with this stuff anymore. And he started cracking down on the little crime, the panhandlers and the subway turnstile jumpers and the graffiti artists. And guess what? The big crime plummeted. So you stop it when it's small, it doesn't get big. And recently, New York added a new law to their books. If you get caught drunk driving, they take your car away. And if you get convicted, you don't get it back. None of this 3-month license suspension stuff. You lose your car. Well, maybe not such a big deal in New York City when cabs cost $4 for a 15-hour ride. But for anybody else, that's serious punishment. And I think that's something we ought to do in Canada as well. And while we're speaking of drinking and driving, how come there are parking lots in taverns? Well, that's a story for another week. I'm Jim Kenzie.
You know, based on past sales, Porsche has allotted 20% of their 911 market to this Carrera 4. But you know, I'm willing to bet that will increase if would-be Porsche owners drive this vehicle and experience the PSM system. It is simply that good. You know, for many, safety means having 10 airbags in your car, but for others, it's a technology that helps you avoid the accident in the first place. Oh, sure, it comes at a price, but you know, like all-wheel drive, maybe someday this technology will work its way down into cars that you and I can afford. Well, that's it for this week. We'll see you next time out for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
We're not bold enough to think that customers that are currently driving the big three are going to come rushing into our showrooms and buy a new Tundra. We're going to have to prove that over time.
They're great when they're new. Everything is always nice when it's new, but put 150, 200,000 miles on it, and then the little stuff starts to get to you. The brakes and that's normal. But water pumps, rear ends, stuff like that. What does a rear end cost for a Japanese vehicle?
TSN's Motoring 99 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oils, formulated for the vehicles you drive and the way you drive them, and Midas Car Care, the way it should be.